Keeping the straws in danger of growing stale. I'm taking it to strange new places.
Back to the rest. Everybody move to the bell to the rest. Back to the rest. Let's everybody move.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Keep and Destroy. This is your host, Adam Love. This is the Gerry Anderson themed podcast where I interview his fans and ask a really hard question. What 5 examples of his work do they want to keep? And what 5 examples do they want to destroy? And for this episode, I'd like to welcome Ben Page to the show. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Adam. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So introduce yourself to the audience, and how did you become a fan of Gerry Anderson?
Yeah, my name's Ben. I'm from Virginia. I became a Gerry Anderson fan, I think about 9.
This is really amazing.
I was flipping through channels.
Yeah. What a ruthless business people around us. Oh, folly.
And I came across Thunderbirds on a channel that no longer exists called Tech TV. They split the Thunderbirds episodes into 2 30-minute installments, and they also added captions with behind-the-scenes trivia.
That must have been distracting.
Well, actually, it was fascinating to me at the time because I didn't know, I was at an age where I hadn't yet thought much about television being made. It just kind of was. I hadn't really questioned it. That also added to the rewatch value because you'd watch it for the story and then you'd watch it again. And I was taping them all on VHS. So I kind of became obsessed and never missed it. They had some ads for it was A&E was the company that made the US DVDs at the time. So that kind of led me into the wider world of Anderson through the A&E DVDs.
You have a company called Cine Marionette. What is it that you do at Cine Marionette?
The Cine Marionette is a thing I started when I was still in college, I guess. I started making a film called Only Savages, and it's a tribute to Gerry Anderson's world with kind of a Twilight Zone storyline. And that kind of led into doing other puppetry-related short films. That was always kind of my obsession, was getting into the industry and making puppet films. So I did the film school thing, didn't really work out, kind of became a freelancer in the local filmmaking community.
Although we all know how Gerry was a reluctant filmmaker, and he made no secret about how much he hated working with puppets. Because obviously you're a fan of puppetry, I can imagine you don't have as much grievance with puppets. But has there been any times when you've been making films that you've hated the process?
Oh, so many. Adam, I can't even begin to tell you. So when I was making my first one, I was getting a bit of a stipend to live on from my parents. Instead of buying food, I was just eating crackers. And living on peanut butter.
Starving artist is a real thing.
I had no background in making puppets, no real knowledge. I had made some kind of Muppet type puppets that I used to put on shows at church and things, or in the community. I had never really made a puppet that I felt like was screen worthy. So I was really struggling to figure out how to do this, and there was no roadmap. So I was completely improvising, being like, why couldn't I just get a couple actors to do this?
Yeah.
I think puppets have a unique aesthetic, which is kind of the obvious part, but I think there's also a lot of psychological stuff that goes on in your mind when you see puppets. You can use them more easily as an avatar, whereas if you see a person on screen, there's a lot more barriers to connecting with the story and the characters than there are with puppets.
I guess it's like when Gerry made UFO, he was stuck with the actors that he had, whereas obviously if he was making Stingray, he can create a James Garner type figure.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, seeing that your body of work involves puppetry and obviously being a big fan of Gerry Anderson, have you seen any of the other puppet shows like Starfleet X-Bomber from Japan or Interstir from South Africa, Team America, Jack Boots in Whitehall? Seen any of those? I'm
a huge X-Bomber fan. I actually, when I was a teenager, made a X-Bomber audio drama that's on the sfxb.co.uk, the sort of leading Starfleet fan site.
I wasn't a fan of that show, but I'd seen Starfleet as a kid and didn't particularly like it. Then when I watched it again when it came out on DVD, which would have been like 2009, I then started to enjoy it and I thought, what the hell was I talking about?
It turns a lot of people off because the early episodes are kind of ropey and some of the dialogue is bad and some of the aesthetic is quite not to everyone's taste.
I think that's what put me off as a kid, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it has an ongoing story arc that travels through the whole show, which is the part that really hooked me, was following the story through the whole thing. So
That's what I wish that New Captain Scarlet was. I wish it was like Starfleet, where it was one episode leading into the other. But
Right. Yeah. There never really was an Anderson show that did that.
Closest one I would say is Dick Spanner.
Right.
Even Terrorhawks, obviously coming out a couple of years after Starfleet, that did start off with the first 3 episodes, Expected Unexpected Part 1 and 2, then leading into Thunder Roar. But then after that, it was all standalone episodes.
It's interesting because he does an interview on the Starfleet DVD.
That's true.
Talking about it a little bit. Yeah, it's disappointing he never decided to go that direction, and Scarlet would have been a good show to do that with.
Right, now it's time to start the keep list. So what's your first choice?
So my first one on the list, Space 1999, Earthbound. Earthbound is a special one to me for a lot of reasons. It's almost an existential kind of show. It feels slow to modern audiences because there's a lot of contemplative moments, just pauses and breaks that allow the viewer to kind of reflect on the meaning of the journey of Moonbase Alpha, which I think is missing in a lot of stuff today. It has some great guest performances from Christopher Lee and Roy Dotrice as well. Don't want to minimize his contributions. He's also kind of relatable too. There's nobody else on Moonbase Alpha who's like, dude, I just want to go home, which would be like my first thing. If I was on a temporary shift on a moon base and I suddenly found myself lost in space, I'd want to go home.
There was one other thing I noticed when I was watching Earthbound. They turn to a character and say,
Tony, go back to the ship, bring back some lights and Dr. Russell's equipment.
and I'm thinking, could that be the Tony that's in season 2?
Aha, good spot there. Yeah, it could be. I mean, it would have to be. He would have to be there.
One of the things that bugged me about season 2, yes, you can imagine perhaps when some characters from season 1 didn't come back, maybe they perhaps died off camera or something, but it's hard to imagine when new characters in season 2 appear and they're very important figures, and yet they were nowhere to be seen in the previous season.
Right, you gotta wonder, were they down in the catacombs somewhere or what? Thunderbirds, The Uninvited. Yeah, really strong episode, kind of a different kind of episode. There's the rescue element, and of course, as we know, a lot of the episodes of Thunderbirds were expanded to fill the new time slot when they went to a longer format at Lou Grade's insistence. But The Uninvited actually feels like two 30-minute episodes that weave together extremely well. So there's kind of the storyline of the lost pyramid and the civilization. There's also the storyline of rescuing Wilson and
Lindsay
in the desert. So there's kind of like the rescue and also the kind of exploration and lost culture theme that's kind of a holdover from Supercar and Fireball, I feel like.
It does harken back to the likes of 5XL5 and Stingray as far as the heroes encountering aliens, or in this case, a tribe of villains. This is something that could easily have suited 5XL5 and Stingray, just replace the Zombites with generic aliens. And it was interesting when you were saying two-parters, but then, because I was expecting you to say the rescue of Scott was one episode, and then the whole Lost Pyramid of Commanders as the second episode, but no, you mentioned rescuing Wilson and Lindsay as well as the pyramid stuff, because that's all in the second half, so I just assumed you were...
Right, yeah, I guess you could divide it. It would be much better to divide it that way.
One thing I've always liked about The Uninvited, a member of International Rescue has been injured, or it needs to be rescued himself, and everyone always prefers Terror New York City. I've always preferred the fact that Scott gets shot down and he's not safe, because he's not at home. At least with Virgil, he crashed on Tracy Island.
I have a very controversial Thunderbirds opinion.
Go ahead.
I definitely prefer Thunderbird 1 to Thunderbird 2.
Nah, I wouldn't say that was controversial. I think I've always liked Thunderbird 2. Virgil has the best vehicle, but Thunderbird 1 has the best pilot. I've always preferred Scott.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Yeah. I kind of aspired to be Scott. I love the voice acting in Thunderbirds. I love Ray Barrett, and I love David Graham. Ray Barrett's particularly great here doing the Zombite commander with his sort of umpa.
That was David Graham.
Was that David Graham?
It was, yeah. There are 4 Zombites that speak. There's the pilot at the beginning. That's Matt Zimmerman. The Zombite guard that shoots Lindsay, that's Peter Dineley. And the Zombite at the controls that fires the missiles, that's Matt Zimmerman again. David Graham does the voice of the Zombite leader, yeah, the Karato Zavaras Aquatan, that kind of thing. Ray Barrett didn't voice any of the Zombites. most of the time where they have two victims are either David Graham and Ray Barrett or David Graham and Matt Zimmerman. And yet in The Uninvited, it's a nice change where Matt Zimmerman and Ray Barrett are teamed up together as Lindsay and Wilson. You don't get that often.
For my third choice, it's Terrahawks, To Catch a Tiger. So you've talked about in the past how it bothers you that Terrahawks gets a bit more comedic as it goes, and it kind of veers away from the darker tone that it had in the beginning.
We were talking about controversial opinions. Yep, that's one of my controversial opinions.
I actually like both eras of Terrahawks.
It's in the transition period at that point where it's still a very serious type of episode and Zelda is quite menacing. However, the characters which are the epitome of silly Terrahawks, Stewed Apples and Sistar, they've pretty much been established by this point. I still like the episode, but it only gets worse as far as the tone.
I love the model of the MEV. I love the Martian landscape that Steve Begg does, and the freighter crash at the beginning.
Oh yes,
just some brilliant miniature work, some brilliant world building, very effective, simple filmmaking that really caught my imagination. And I think you see echoes of stuff like To Catch a Tiger in my work, especially in a film I did called Beacon.
I saw that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That was a fun one to do. I love the energy of Richard Harvey's music. His score is strong throughout, but this is one of my favorites. Very cosmic. I'm a sucker for a good Anderson countdown.
Oh yeah.
So that's always exciting.
But how did Einstein get into the MEV when he had to go onto the Martian surface? I know he's a clone, but he still needs to breathe, right? Unless they have oxygen pills, like 5-Lexol-5.
Right.
I have already appointed an executioner.
How do you feel about Moy's contribution? It doesn't work for that character, in my opinion.
No, it doesn't fit with the character at all.
You had chances to kill any one of us.
I cannot kill. It is the one shred of self-esteem I have left. I promise to make the clone's death a lingering eternity of pain.
What?
It's a shame that Lord Tempo, Master of Time, didn't appear until after this episode, as I think he would have been a better choice. I can imagine he would look at Earth's history, such as the Middle Ages, for inspiration.
She doesn't answer.
Did you expect her to?
Yeah, Lord Tempo would have been a better choice character-wise. And there's a lot of discontinuity with Zelda's monsters, which kind of leads me to believe that she had clones of each one, and that each one was kind of had some sort of genetic variation.
I never thought of that. That's interesting. That would explain why SRAM no longer speaks, yeah.
Right, where he appears and there's no speaking. You're like,
Yeah.
What happened to SRAM, Lord of Felony? He's just kind of a growling pet of Zelda's.
I had my own theory about SRAM. Maybe after Thunder or Zelda gave him some kind of lobotomy to subdue him, maybe he wasn't so loyal.
Yeah, good theory.
Fingers crossed, if there's ever an opportunity to do Terrahawks audios, I want to do a SRAM story, and I want to do that story where he's lobotomized. Explain that's what happened to him.
That would be fun. I would definitely listen to that.
Have you ever noticed how the two hostages, Cole and Davis, look like Einstein and Hero?
Yeah, I kind of wonder if they were an earlier generation, Einstein and Hero. My fourth pick is Stingray, Subterranean Sea. Some people are not fond of Subterranean Sea. I was super drawn to the otherworldly atmosphere, to the kind of like Jules Verne exploration adventure. And they find this kind of strange world that nobody knew existed. And the Stingray crew have to explore it. There's not like a strong antagonist. So there's not a titan kind of driving the narrative.
It's a man versus nature type of storyline.
And the kind of like terror of the moment when the water floods back in and they're racing back to the ship to try and survive.
Yeah, it's a great moment, that.
The visuals are so strong and striking, as they are in all of Stingray. I could pick almost any Stingray episode, and there's some strong visuals in it. I will say that the criticism about the ending, where it just kind of ends and they're on a deserted island sending a postcard, it does feel a bit of a cop-out. I will give the critics of this episode that it's not the most satisfying ending.
But have you noticed in Subterranean Sea, the black and white footage of the explosion and the credits, it has a blue tint to it.
It does, yeah.
I don't know why they did that. It just seemed very odd because they didn't go full color until the last 13 episodes of the production order.
I liked that it was monochrome, so that if you were watching on a color TV, you'd be like, what's going on? And then suddenly, boom, color. My final keep is Joe 90, Colonel McLean. I'm really enamored with the film that this is based on, which is a French film called The Wages of Fear, which is about driving some trucks filled with nitroglycerin through the South American jungle. If you've never seen it before, you should definitely check it out. There's a supercar episode that's kind of based on it as well. What's that called?
Keep It Cool?
Keep It Cool, thank you. And I just love to see a classic film reinterpreted as super marionation. And Colonel McLean is one of the finest examples. Just and also the design of the trucks, the detail and all the miniature work at Joe 90, they just really hit their stride. And Mike Trim comes to the forefront in the design.
It's a very mature episode. I was watching it again this morning and I thought Private Johnson, even though he's a one-off character, he has his own little story arc with how he's basically the comic relief and he's not taking Joe seriously as a colonel. And then it's once his sergeant is killed, he stays with Joe to the bitter end. I like that little character arc.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Joe 90 in general is how deep the emotions go and how human the characters are.
Yeah.
There's some of that that's missing from Captain Scarlet, in my opinion. I love some of the stuff that they do with the guest characters. It's one of the ones that works better, I think, with Joe being someone else, even though you don't really explore what that does to Joe's psyche to be a different person.
I love it when fans always complain about that aspect. It's make-believe. Get over it.
Yeah.
It's like when people say, oh, Torchy is scary. No, it's not. It's just this stupid, dumb kids thing that's a pile of crap. He's not Chucky, for God's sake. Calm down. Fans say some silly things.
They do. You're absolutely right.
I did warn you I'd be taking this to strange new places. This episode of Keep and Destroy is the first of a two-parter. Because Ben and I had discussed quite a lot in our interview, I feel it's best not to have so much lost in the cutting room. And so the next episode will cover Ben's destroy list. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe. And if you would like to donate to the show, please go to Buy Me a Coffee or GoFundMe. The links are in the description. This is Adam Luff, signing out.